Learning is the act of acquiring new, or modifying and reinforcing, existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences, and may involve synthesizing different types of information. The ability to learn is possessed by humans, animals, plants, and some machines. Progress over time tends to follow a learning curve. It does not happen all at once, but builds upon and is shaped by previous knowledge. To that end, learning may be viewed as a process, rather than a collection of factual and procedural knowledge. Learning produces changes in the organism, and the changes produced are relatively permanent. Human learning may occur as part of education, personal development, schooling, or training. It may be goal-oriented and may be aided by motivation. The study of how learning occurs is part of educational psychology, neuropsychology, learning theory, and pedagogy. Learning may occur as a result of habituation, a classical conditioning seen in many animal species, or as a result of more complex activities such as play, seen only in relatively intelligent animals. Learning may occur consciously or without conscious awareness. Learning that an aversive event can't be avoided nor escaped is called learned helplessness. There is evidence for human behavioral learning prenatally, in which habituation has been observed as early as 32 weeks into gestation, indicating that the central nervous system is sufficiently developed and primed for learning and memory to occur very early on in development. Play has been approached by several theorists as the first form of learning. Children experiment with the world, learn the rules, and learn to interact through play. Lev Vygotsky agrees that play is pivotal for children's development, since they make meaning of their environment through playing educational games. Types: non-associative learning. Non-associative learning refers to a relatively permanent change in the strength of response to a single stimulus due to repeated exposure to that stimulus. Changes due to such factors as sensory adaptation, fatigue, or injury do not qualify as non-associative learning. Non-associative learning can be divided into habituation and sensitization. Habituation is an example of non-associative learning in which the strength or probability of a response diminishes when the response is repeated. The response is typically a reflex or unconditioned response. Thus, habituation must be distinguished from extinction, which is an associative process. In operant extinction, for example, a response declines because it is no longer followed by reward. An example of habituation can be seen in small songbirds. If a stuffed owl is put into the cage, the birds initially react to it as though it were a real predator. Soon the birds react less, showing habituation. If another stuffed owl is introduced, the birds react to it again as though it were a predator, demonstrating that it is only a very specific stimulus that is habituated to. Habituation has been shown in essentially every species of animal, as well as the sensitive plant Mimosa pudica and the large protozoan Stenocoeruleus. Sensitization is an example of non-associative learning in which the progressive amplification of a response follows repeated administrations of a stimulus. An everyday example of this mechanism is the repeated tonic stimulation of peripheral nerves that occurs if a person rubs their arm continuously. After a while, this stimulation creates a warm sensation that eventually turns painful. The pain results from the progressively amplified synaptic response of the peripheral nerves, warning that the stimulation is harmful. Sensitization is thought to underlie both adaptive as well as maladaptive learning processes in the organism. Active learning occurs when a person takes control of the learning experience. Since understanding information is the key aspect of learning, it is important for learners to recognize what they understand and what they do not. By doing so, they can monitor their own mastery of subjects. Active learning encourages encourages learners to have an internal dialogue in which they verbalize understandings. This and other metacognitive strategies can be taught to a child over time. Studies within metacognition have proven the value in active learning, claiming that the learning is usually at a stronger level as a result. In addition, learners have more incentive to learn when they have control over not only how they learn but also what they learn. Active learning is a key characteristic of student-centered learning. Conversely, passive learning and direct instruction are characteristics of teacher-centered learning. Associative learning. Associative learning is the process by which someone learns an association between two stimuli, or a behavior and a stimulus. The two forms of associative learning are classical and operant conditioning. In the former, a previously neutral stimulus is repeatedly presented, together with a reflex-eliciting stimuli, until eventually the neutral stimulus elicits a response on its own. In operant conditioning, a certain behavior is either reinforced or punished, which alters the probability that the behavior will reoccur. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is the use of consequences to modify the occurrence and form of behavior. Operant conditioning is distinguished from Pavlovian conditioning in that operant conditioning uses reinforcement, punishment to alter an action-outcome association. In contrast, Pavlovian conditioning involves strengthening of the stimulus-outcome association. Elemental theories of associative learning argue that concurrent stimuli tend to be perceived as separate units rather than holistically. Behaviorism is a psychological movement that seeks to alter behavior by arranging the environment to elicit successful changes and to arrange consequences to maintain or diminish a behavior. Behaviorists study behaviors that can be measured and changed by the environment. However, they do not deny that there are thought processes that interact with those behaviors. Delayed discounting is the process of devaluing rewards based on the delay of time they are presented. This process is thought to be tied to impulsivity. Impulsivity is a core process for many behaviors. Making decisions is an important part of everyday functioning. How we make those decisions is based on what we perceive are the most valuable or worthwhile actions. This is determined by what we find are the most reinforcing stimuli. So when teaching an individual a response, you need to find the most potent reinforcer for that person. This may be a larger reinforcer at a later time or a smaller immediate reinforcer. Classical conditioning. The typical paradigm for classical conditioning involves repeatedly pairing an unconditioned stimulus with another, previously neutral stimulus. Following conditioning, the response occurs both to the unconditioned stimulus and to the other, unrelated stimulus. The response to the conditioned stimulus is termed a conditioned response. The classic example is Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. Pavlov fed his dogs meat powder, which naturally made the dogs salivate. Salivating is a reflexive response to the meat powder. Meat powder is the unconditioned stimulus and the salivation is the unconditioned response. Pavlov rang a bell before presenting the meat powder. The first time Pavlov rang the bell, the neutral stimulus, the dogs did not salivate, but once he put the meat powder in their mouths they began to salivate. After numerous pairings of bell and food, the dogs learned that the bell signaled that food was about to come, and began to salivate when they heard the bell. Once this occurred, the bell became the conditioned stimulus and the salivation to the bell became the conditioned response. Classical conditioning has been demonstrated in many species. For example, it is seen in honeybees, in the proboscis extension reflex paradigm. Another influential person in the world of classical conditioning is John B. Watson. Watson's work was very influential and paved the way for B. F. Skinner's radical behaviorism. Watson's behaviorism stood in direct contrast to Freud and other accounts based largely on introspection. Watson's view was that the introspective method was too subjective, and that we should limit the study of human development to directly observable behaviors. In 1913, Watson published the article Psychology as the Behaviorist Views, in which he argued that laboratory studies should serve psychology best as a science. Watson's most famous and controversial experiment, Little Albert, where he demonstrated how psychologists can account for the learning of emotion through classical conditioning principles. Imprinting is a kind of learning occurring at a particular life stage that is rapid and apparently independent of the consequences of behavior. In filial imprinting, young animals, particularly birds, form an association with another individual or, in some cases, an object that they respond to as they would to a parent. In 1935, the Austrian zoologist Konrad Lorenz discovered that certain birds follow and form a bond if the object makes sounds. Play generally describes behavior with no particular end in itself, but that improves performance in similar future situations. This is seen in a wide variety of vertebrates besides humans, but is mostly limited to mammals and birds. Cats are known to play with a ball of string when young, which gives them experience with catching prey. Besides inanimate objects, animals may play with other members of their own species or other animals, such as orcas playing with seals they have caught. Play involves a significant cost to animals, such as increased vulnerability to predators and the risk of injury and possibly infection. It also consumes energy, so there must be significant benefits associated with play for it to have evolved. Play is generally seen in younger animals, suggesting a link with learning. However, it may also have other benefits not associated directly with learning, for example improving physical fitness. Play, as it pertains to humans as a form of learning, is central to a child's learning and development. Through play, children learn social skills such as sharing and collaboration. Children develop emotional skills such as learning to deal with the emotion of anger through play activities. As a form of learning, play also facilitates the development of thinking and language skills in children. There are 5 types of play. Sensory motor play, aka functional play, characterized by repetition of activity. Role play occurs from 3 to 15 years of age. Rule-based play, where authoritative prescribed codes of conduct are primary. Construction play involves experimentation and building. Movement play, aka physical play. These 5 types of play are often intersecting. All types of play generate thinking and problem-solving skills in children. Children learn to think creatively when they learn through play. Specific activities involved in each type of play change over time as humans progress through the lifespan. Play as a form of learning can occur solitarily or involve interacting with others. Enculturation is the process by which people learn values and behaviors that are appropriate or necessary in the surrounding culture. Parents, other adults, and peers shape the individual's understanding of these values. If successful, enculturation results in competence in the language, values and rituals of the culture. This is different from acculturation, where a person adopts the values and societal rules of a culture different from the native one. Multiple examples of enculturation can be found cross-culturally. Collaborative practices in them as are who people have shown that participation in everyday interaction and later learning activities contributed to enculturation rooted in non-verbal social experience. As the children participated in everyday activities, they learned the cultural significance of these interactions. The collaborative and helpful behaviors exhibited by Mexican and Mexican heritage children is a cultural practice known as being acomedido. Chilhuani girls in Peru describe themselves as weaving constantly, following behavior shown by the other adults. Episodic learning. Episodic learning is a change in behavior that occurs as a result of an event. For example, a fear of dogs that follows being bitten by a dog is episodic learning. Episodic learning is so named because events are recorded into episodic memory, which is one of the three forms of explicit learning and retrieval, along with perceptual memory and semantic memory. Multimedia learning. Multimedia learning is where a person uses both auditory and visual stimuli to learn information. This type of learning relies on dual coding theory. E-learning and augmented learning. Electronic learning or e-learning is a general term used to refer to computer-enhanced learning. A specific and always more diffused e-learning is mobile learning, which uses different mobile telecommunication equipment, such as cellular phones. When a learner interacts with the e-learning environment, it's called augmented learning. By adapting to the needs of individuals, the context-driven instruction can be dynamically tailored to the learner's natural environment. Augmented digital content may include text, images, video, or audio. By personalizing instruction, augmented learning has been shown to improve learning performance for a lifetime. See also minimally invasive education. More purported that three core types of interaction are necessary for quality, effective online learning: learner-learner, learner-instructor, and learner-content. In his theory of transactional distance, Moore contended that structure and interaction or dialogue bridge the gap in understanding and communication that is created by geographical distances. Rote learning. Rote learning is memorizing information so that it can be recalled by the learner exactly the way it was read or heard. The major technique used for rote learning is learning by repetition, based on the idea that a learner can recall the material exactly if the information is repeatedly processed. Rote learning is used in diverse areas, from mathematics to music to religion. Although it has been criticized by some educators, rote learning is a necessary precursor to meaningful learning. Meaningful learning. Meaningful learning is the concept that learned knowledge is fully understood to the extent that it relates to other knowledge. To this end, meaningful learning contrasts with rote learning, in which information is acquired without regard to understanding. Meaningful learning, on the other hand, implies there is a comprehensive knowledge of the context of the facts learned. Informal learning. Informal learning occurs through the experience of day-to-day situations. It is learning from life, during a meal at table with parents, play, exploring, etc. Formal learning. Formal learning is learning that takes place within a teacher-student relationship, such as in a school system. The term formal learning has nothing to do with the formality of the learning, but rather the way it is directed and organized. Informal learning. The learning and training departments set out the goals and objectives of the learning. Non-formal learning. Non-formal learning is organized learning outside the formal learning system. For example, learning by coming together with people with similar interests and exchanging viewpoints, in clubs or in youth organizations. Workshops. Non-formal learning and combined approaches. The educational system may use a combination of formal, informal, and non-formal learning methods. The UN and EU recognize these different forms of learning. In some schools, students can get points that count in the formal learning systems if they get work done in informal learning circuits. They may be given time to assist international youth workshops and training courses on the condition they prepare, contribute, share and can prove this offered valuable new insight, help to acquire new skills, a place to get experience in organizing, teaching, etc. To learn a skill such as solving a Rubik's Cube quickly, several factors come into play at once. Reading directions helps a player learn the patterns that solve the Rubik's Cube. Practicing the moves repeatedly helps build muscle memory and speed. Thinking critically about moves helps find shortcuts, which speeds future attempts. Observing the Rubik's Cube's 6 colors help anchor solutions in the mind. Revisiting the cube occasionally helps retain the skill. Tangential learning. Tangential learning is the process by which people self-educate if a topic is exposed to them in a context that they already enjoy. For example, after playing a music-based video game, some people may be motivated to learn how to play a real instrument, or after watching a TV show that references Faust and Lovecraft, some people may be inspired to read the original work. Self-education can be improved with systematization. According to experts in natural learning, self-oriented learning training has proven an effective tool for assisting independent learners with the natural phases of learning. Dialogic learning. Dialogic learning is a type of learning based on dialogue. Incidental learning. This learning is not planned by the instructor of the student, but occurs as a byproduct of another activity, an experience, observation, self-reflection, interaction, unique event, or common routine task. This learning happens in addition to or apart from the instructor's plans and the student's expectations. Incidental learning is an occurrence that is not generally accounted for using the traditional methods of instructional objectives and outcomes assessment. This type of learning occurs in part as a product of social interaction and active involvement in both online and on-site courses. Research implies that some unassessed aspects of on-site and online learning challenge the equivalency of education between the two modalities. Both on-site and online learning have distinct advantages, with traditional on-campus students experiencing high degrees of incidental learning in 3 times as many areas as online students. Additional research is called for to investigate the implications of these findings both conceptually and pedagogically. Domains. Benjamin Bloom has suggested 3 domains of learning: cognitive, to recall, calculate, discuss, analyze, problem solve, etc. Psychomotor, to dance, swim, ski, dive, drive a car, ride a bike, etc. Affective, to like something or someone, love, appreciate, fear, hate, worship, etc. These domains are not mutually exclusive. For example, in learning to play chess, the person must learn the rules, but must also learn how to set up the chess pieces and how to properly hold and move a chess piece. Furthermore, later in the game the person may even learn to love the game itself, value its applications in life, and appreciate its history. Transfer. Transfer of learning is the application of skill, knowledge or understanding to resolve a novel problem, a situation that happens when certain conditions are fulfilled. Research indicates that learning transfer is infrequent, most common when cued, primed, and guided, and has sought to clarify what it is and how it might be promoted through instruction. Over the history of its discourse, various hypotheses and definitions have been advanced. First, it is speculated that different types of transfer exist, including near transfer, the application of skill to solve a novel problem in a similar context, and far transfer, the application of skill to solve novel problem presented in a different context. Furthermore, Perkins and Salomon suggest that positive transfer in cases when learning supports novel problem-solving, and negative transfer occurs when prior learning inhibits performance on highly correlated tasks, such as second or third language learning. Concepts of positive and negative transfer have a long history. Researchers in the early 20th century described the possibility that habits or mental acts developed by a particular kind of training may inhibit rather than facilitate other mental activities. Finally, Schwartz, Bransford and Sears have proposed that transferring knowledge into a situation may differ from transferring knowledge out to a situation as a means to reconcile findings that transfer may both be frequent and challenging to promote. A significant and long research history has also attempted to explicate the conditions under which transfer of learning might occur. Early research by Ruger, for example, found that the level of attention, attitudes, method of attack, a search for new points of view, a careful testing of hypothesis, and generalization were all valuable approaches for promoting transfer. To encourage transfer through teaching, Perkins and Salomon recommend aligning instruction with practice and assessment, and bridging, or encouraging learners to reflect on past experiences and make connections between prior knowledge and current content.